Very pleased to be joined again by the former president of WCW, WWE Hall of Famer Eric Bischoff here on Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. Eric, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So MLW One Shot is Thursday at the Melrose Ballroom, 7 p.m. bell time in Long Island City, Queens, live on YouTube. I heard Paul Walter Hauser had a hand in getting this connection made. What are you looking forward to about getting involved with MLW and being in New York City?
You know, a couple things really, and not necessarily in order, but anytime I get an opportunity to go out in front of a live crowd and perform, it's just fun. I enjoy it, and I do miss it, to be really honest about it. It's one of the things I miss. So that's like probably the first, but real close second is just the collaboration so far, and it's limited, right? I'm coming in for one night. It's not like I'm coming in and trying to have a major impact on the company, in one night. I'm coming in to be a part of something and to perhaps leave my fingerprints on it in a way that people will recognize. I'm interested in working with some of the talents and perhaps trying to get a little bit more out of them than perhaps they're used to in the form of doing in-ring promos and backstage things in particular, just a little differently. Threading stories throughout the entire show, I think, is really important to a wrestling format, and had a little bit of a hand in that for this episode coming up Thursday. So all those things kind of combined is just an overall positive vibe for me, and I'm having fun doing it, which was my intent going in.
I attend MLW fairly regularly because it's near enough where I live in New York. A lot of people who are on TV today got good exposure in MLW over the last couple of years that they've been running. What do you see when you see MLW, and how much have you interacted with Court before?
Court and I have had several conversations over the years. We've made attempts to try to do exactly what we're doing, this Thursday, but timing, scheduling has never really worked out. So it all came together thanks to Paul Walter Hauser in a very spontaneous and fun way. And I've dealt with Court and his team now for a couple of weeks, briefly on the format of the show, and kind of talking things through and discussing different ways to perhaps present the product because I'm going to be there. That the other thing I miss other than performing is collaboration when you've got a cool team. Like if you've got a writing team or creative team and the chemistry's good, collaborating on ideas is some of the most fun I've ever had in professional wrestling. Some of the greatest moments, I have personally are, remembering when one kernel of an idea, just a seed of an idea, starts to grow right in front of you because people are jumping in and adding to and taking out. And, when that one person sits up at the back of the room and says, "Hey, I got an idea. What if we do this?" And you take this and you turn it into that. That's a fun process.
Anyone over the years, whether it's WCW, whether it's AWA, whether it's WWE, that you would look forward to raising their hand with an idea like that in a meeting where you'd be like, all right, I want to hear what this person's take on that is?
One of the guys that I got to know in TNA quite well, and
TNA too.
I met Bully Ray
Hmm.
in WWE was my first real connection with Bully, and we just hit it off on a personal level. Didn't really talk too much about business or creative ideas, but over the years we started to discuss more and more. And then in TNA, I got to work with him. So I think Bully has probably, I know it's controversial because he's a controversial personality. It just is what it is. But he's also very, very smart, and he understands the audience, and that's the key. That's one of the things I like about working with Cord is he's got enough experience. He understands what the audience wants to see. And you can be as creative as you want to be or think you are and come up with all the wacky ideas you think you can come up with. But if they don't connect with the audience because you don't know how to anticipate how an audience is going to react, they almost inevitably fall flat. Bully has that experience. He has the ability to understand a wrestling story from the viewer's perspective and what makes it work. So of all the people I've worked with in the past, I think Bully would probably be the one I'd be most excited about.
What's cool for me with that idea is that it's Bully who got his start really in ECW, kind of in the grassroots of that was where he sort of cut his teeth, and you with the WCW sort of at the same time, and then so many experiences in between, to get to where you guys work together, and it's interesting to see him still getting involved, also with NXT recently too. I think he had a match on the NXT when they did the ECW reunion show. Um, do you still get to be a wrestling fan when you watch the product, or do you veer right into critique when you watch a show? What gets you excited about watching wrestling?
I get more excited about the business of the wrestling business than I do about the wrestling of the wrestling business. I probably quit being a fan of wrestling about 1987 once I broke into the business. And I just immersed myself into how it works, what makes it work better. um, and now when I watch wrestling, I don't watch it necessarily for the matches, although I enjoy them. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm going to force myself to watch them, but that's not the driver for me. The driver for me is trying to anticipate, first of all, recognizing what's being done, recognizing the storyline, recognizing plot points in a story, or what I think the plot points are, trying to determine where a story is going, what's going to happen next. Oh, by the way, those are the same feelings that one should get when watching any dramatic series. Um, it's the same thing. So when I see really well produced wrestling, I look for it, and when I see it, I get really excited about it. You know, i.e., the bloodline in WWE right now, and for the last several years has been one of the most fascinating creative efforts in the history of the wrestling business, in my opinion. Far exceeds the storyline quality of the NWO. So I love watching that and trying to determine where it's going to go. It's fun. That's my jam.
It's interesting. I actually had the bloodline on my list of things I wanted to bring up to you too. So it's interesting to hear you say, it exceeds the NWO. I love the pacing of it. I love that there's so many individual characters that
Hmm.
now have more nuance. You look at where Jay Uso was at the beginning of this. You look where he is now. I was telling somebody yesterday, I'd probably let him wrestle Gunther for the world title at WrestleMania at this point because he's at that level now, and it's because of the creative of that story.
And that's exactly what I mean about the business of the wrestling business. When you and I talked about this last year. The Bloodline storyline, and the reason it's, in my opinion, far exceeds the NWO storyline, is because of its nuance, because of the layers, and because it has become the gift that keeps on giving, in the sense that new characters, new personalities are emerging, or characters and personalities that were kind of stuck in, mid-roster, positions, are now emerging, like Jey Uso, into a definitely a superstar, probably in the top 10% of the company, 15% of the company. I think that's fascinating, and it was the creative that did it. It was the creative that got the best out of Jey Uso. It was the creative that got the best, in my opinion, out of Sami Zayn
Mhm.
a little over a year ago. It and when I see that, I get excited because I know the work and the thought process that goes into that, and it's hard not to be impressed. I'm going to make one thing really clear. I think the Bloodline storyline, not even comparable in any way to anything else. I think it far exceeds the NWO storyline, but I don't think the Bloodline will have the same impact overall, culturally speaking, on the wrestling industry as the NWO did. NWO came along at the ideal. It was just the perfect time with a fresh take, going after 18 to 49-year-old males when WWE was typically chasing teen and preteens. That was the seismic shift that really changed professional wrestling in so many ways as a television property. And that's what I mean by impact. Will the bloodline have that impact? I don't think so. Financially, it'll outproduce what the NWO produced for sure, in terms of scale, but it just won't have the cultural impact, in my humble opinion.
And that's always the tough part in wrestling, right? Is finding new things, when you can do something unique and new. And that's what the NWO was in its time. People hadn't seen anything in the US much like that, and especially with Hulk Hogan being at the centerpiece of it, a guy who they had seen in a certain way for a decade plus, and all of a sudden we're flipping the script now, and he's on the other side, and you have to figure out, all right, am I sticking with him or am I not? So it's two different things in my opinion.
Exactly. Apples and oranges,
Yeah.
really. And I appreciate you seeing that, because I've tried to explain that to people. They always flip out and say, "What do you mean the bloodline storyline's better? You're supposed to be sticking up for your work." And it's like, I'm pretty honest about stuff. It is what it is, folks.
It would be fascinating if we could figure out some way to cross the two over at some point, because that might be fun. But I'm not sure. Well, I mean, you do have X-Pac on NXT tonight, so at least you got
Yeah,
something.
hey, I just ran into. We just had breakfast together. It was awesome.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Since we last talked, a lot has changed in WWE. TKO acquired the company. Vince McMahon is gone. The Rock's come in. Paul Levesque's taken over. You have the Netflix deal coming on. You've had some interaction with the company. Obviously, you're doing NXT this week. What to you has changed the most, having like the Ari Emanuels, Nick Khan, Paul Levesque, Shawn Michaels for whatever the better or worse is in WWE? And can WWE actually get bigger than it is?
Yes, they can certainly get bigger, and they're getting bigger every day. And I think one of the things that I'm on the outside looking in. This is the first, face-to-face contact that I've had with anybody in WWE since the transition, right? Since TKO took over. So I don't have any firsthand, experience, but from the outside looking in, just look at the level of sponsorships and the use of corporate sponsors within WWE programming, particularly the PLEs. We're seeing so much more of that. We're seeing, I guess I'm noticing economies of scale when it comes to venues and buildings. I just think this synergy, which is a word that I learned to despise during the AOL Time Warner merger with Turner. I hated that word because nobody really knew what it meant, or if they knew what it meant, they didn't know how to exercise it or take advantage of synergy. But I mean, just on the outside looking in, I can see what they're doing. It's pretty evident from a business perspective, and look what they're doing internationally. The growth, and that's the key. I think Netflix. Oh, look, the Jake Paul Tyson fight, 70 million homes around the world. What's WWE going to do? I don't know. It's got a pretty big footprint internationally already. It indicates to me that there's a massive market, and once you've overcome the distribution challenge that exists in international television distribution, once you've overcome that, which Netflix will do, there's no limit to how big the WWE audience will get, and there's no limit really in terms of how the WWE will be able to take advantage of that and exploit that growth. So I'm so bullish on WWE and Netflix. It's not even funny.
And it's easily the biggest change in the wrestling programming landscape, probably since Nitro, moving the number one show on cable onto a streaming service. But I've talked to a bunch of people about it, and it's like people are concerned about like, oh, what are they gonna lose by doing that? But I think you gain so much more by just taking the leap and being the leader there than you do by worrying about short-term possible losses.
Well,
What do you think about that?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Number one, but if you just for perspective, if somebody's not really sure if you're right or not, um, television is dying. Linear television, cable television is dying a slow, predictable, ugly death. What is the advantage to hanging on to cable because you're afraid that you might lose that position as the number one, you know, product on Monday nights, for example, on cable television? If that audience is continuing to diminish and deteriorate because more and more viewers prefer to get their content on a streaming platform, what's the advantage in hanging on versus the advantage strategically of recognizing the fact and making a big move to end up where viewers want to be in terms of where they get their content? So I didn't see it as controversial at all. It took courage, professional courage and business courage to do it. But I didn't find it controversial. I don't think they're going to lose anything. I think it's going to be nothing but added value.
It reminded me of a less risky version of what they did when they launched the WWE Network. Like they knew where it was going, so
Exactly.
they needed to get involved in the game. And plus, they have a cable piece, they have a broadcast piece, and now they have the NBC piece too coming up. So it's not like they're not anywhere. Like they're everywhere they need to be, or at least they're set up to be that way.
Well, and
Um,
it's a good point about the network, and it reminds me of Wayne Gretzky. You know, skate where the puck's going to be, not where it is. It's the same thing.
yeah.
Go.
Is it enjoyable for you to relive the WCW days when people rediscover it?
Um, I feel a sense of gratitude. It was a lot of work. It was important for me personally at the time, and it left an impression. I think Nitro and my time in WCW had a pretty significant impact on the industry as a whole then, as it does now. You still see, look, the fact that WWE is live every week, who started that? When did that begin? Oh yeah, that was in 1995 with a show called Nitro. It was the first time a wrestling show in the modern era had ever been presented live each and every week. WWE figured it out and caught up, afterwards. You look at some of the international talent, the lucha style of wrestling that's being presented, a lot of the Japanese styles that are being presented here in the United States. I wasn't the first to do it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not that full of myself, but I'm the first one to bring it to prime time on a regular basis, week after week after week with the cruiserweight division. That was a big commitment. And guess what we see today? That influence of the Rey Mysterios, the Eddie Guerreros, the Dean Malenkos, all the luchadors that came in from Mexico, a lot of the Japanese wrestlers that came over that were part of that cruiserweight division, not once or twice a year, but every single week. We built the show around them. The cruiserweight division was our main event for the 9 o'clock crossover hour. That's how important they were to the show and the format. And guess what? We're still seeing that today. So, the factions that we're talking about the bloodline. There were factions before the NWO, but there certainly has been a lot more effort to recreate the NWO since the NWO than there ever was before it. So there's so many things that we did that were super innovative, risky, controversial. Uh, all the peripheral wrestling coverage suggested it was all going to be a horrible, miserable failure and all of that. And it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to the wrestling business. I think the fact that WWE is as strong as it is today was in no small part due to the fact that Nitro taught them how to produce wrestling.
And competition drives people forward. It's always going to be a better show when you've got somebody pushing you from all angles. What is it like to be, and I thought about this a lot, what is it like to be the only person to defeat Vince McMahon consistently for any length of time during his entire run? And it's crazy to think about, but his run was like 40 years, and you're the only person to ever do it.
I don't think about it that way, because ultimately he won and I didn't. So
Right.
there's that. It's kind of like, yeah, but I won all 8 rounds of that 9-round fight. You still lost. So I don't think about it too much. I do recognize and think about, again, from a business perspective, the overall impact of Nitro on WWE. And I probably will take more credit for WWE's success than I probably deserve. But I think, in fairness, it was, again, we taught Vince the value of the 18 to 49 male audience that up until Nitro came along, he didn't care about. His business model was teen and preteen. Had WWE stuck with that business model, I don't think it's unrealistic to suggest that perhaps they wouldn't be here today. If WWE wouldn't have reacted to WCW the way they were forced to by bringing in Mike Tyson and turning Stone Cold Steve Austin against Mr. McMahon, all of those ideas, Mr. McMahon wasn't a character on the show until a year after he saw me doing it. So there were so many things that we did that I know helped WWE become the success it is today. That I think about that, but I don't think about one-on-one me and Vince McMahon. Yeah. I just wish he would have showed up when I challenged him to fight, because that would have been fun.
That would have been interesting TV, if nothing else. Did you get a chance to watch the Mr. McMahon documentary? And was there anything that stood out to you while you were watching it?
I did watch it. And I think the thing that I walked away thinking about the most was the relationship between Vince and his kids. Some of that struck home for me.
Mm.
I identified with Shane a little bit for different reasons, but I identified with that. Um, that felt raw and honest to me. The rest of it, quite frankly, were things that I've either heard about or was aware of in the past. So none of it really felt like new information. But the family dynamic I found to be very, very interesting.
And I haven't gotten a chance to watch the Ted Turner documentary on Max yet. Did you get a chance to check that out? And was there anything new that you found interesting about the head of the company you once worked for?
I haven't watched it yet. I was excited about it until someone who watched it recently, who I respect, told me that I'm going to be disappointed just from a production point of view.
Mm.
It sounds like it wasn't very well done, and that disappoints me. And I haven't even seen it yet, and I'm disappointed, which is unfair. But I will watch it. I just have been fairly busy the last couple of weeks and haven't had time to just sit down and watch something recreationally.
To you, what's the most interesting thing about Ted Turner that maybe a wrestling fan would be interested in knowing?
Oh, I don't think I have any insight into Ted Turner that most people don't have. I didn't know Ted personally, really. Fortunately, was able to conduct some business with him one on one, but very limited. I think what I think people have forgotten just how important Ted Turner was to the world, not just to professional wrestling, for crying out loud. But if you look at what Ted had vision. Ted was like the Elon Musk of the media world in his day. Ted saw things long before anybody saw them. When Ted Turner bought the MGM film library, everybody thought he was out of his mind. People thought he was crazy because Ted, at that time, people didn't see the value in libraries. Ted did. And he made moves long before anybody else did that helped build the network. I think the vision of Ted Turner, personally, the fact that he's so invested in the environment. Ted likes to hunt and fish, but he protects the environment. There's that balance that I think people should try to find. I just so many things on a personal level and a professional level that impress me with Ted that I hope when I see the documentary that I feel differently than my friend. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, doing the prep for this, I realized like God, that did come out, and I didn't get a chance to watch it yet. From a news perspective, I'm interested to see how CNN, is handled on there too, because that obviously changed the game significantly in the 1980s, going 24-hour news, and you see the way what the impacts that has today too. Um, you've been around everyone in wrestling. We mentioned a little bit before about the creative side. Is there anybody present, company excluded, of course, who you feel were the smartest people on the business side of things in wrestling?
Well, you have to look. As controversial as Vince McMahon is, you one cannot deny his vision and his business acumen and the company that he built. I mean, I haven't been into the new facility yet. I hope to take a tour sometime soon. But um, if you just look at the company that he built, put aside his personal issues and flaws, just look at the company, the quality of the talent on a corporate level, the things that Vince McMahon had to overcome. He took this ridiculously niche product that most people in the industry look. I mean, professional wrestling, in the opinions of most people in the television industry, going into the '90s, was just a notch or two above porn, right? There was no respect given to it. Vince McMahon overcame all that and turned it into a mainstream property, and now a global mainstream property. So you have to look at that. Creatively, there's Kevin Dunn gets a lot of flack, and of course Kevin got set in his ways, and he had his own way of doing things and what he thought was the right way to produce wrestling. And now you've got new people coming in, and we're all seeing the results of that. And it's easy to dismiss Kevin Sullivan in light of some of the new innovations that we're seeing, or not Kevin Sullivan, I'm sorry, Kevin Dunn. It's easy to dismiss Kevin Dunn in light of what we're seeing today. But if you look at the production values of WWE going back 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, that's KD. That's Kevin Dunn. And he brought professional wrestling to such a high level from a production value perspective that it forced media companies to look at it differently. It forced advertisers to look at the property differently. It was no longer that kind of low budget, smoke-filled room, kind of minimal audience property. This was an event, and people had to pay attention. So there's been so many smart people involved in the business that I've had a chance to spend time with that hard to mention them all.
We're going to move on to something now we call the 3 count. It's going to be 3 quick questions and your answers. First question, does Eric Bischoff ever get tired of talking about pro wrestling?
Oh, yeah. Very much so. Very much so. But it always depends on the questions. If the questions are good, you can light me up quick.
Nice. Second question, outside of the NWO storyline, what was your favorite story you were able to tell in WCW?
I think the Bill Goldberg story was pretty cool. Would I do it differently today, given what I know now versus what I didn't know then? Sure, it would be a little better. But that was a pretty cool story, and it came at a very, very cool time.
I tell you what, I really enjoyed his return to wrestling too, as kind of the older Goldberg, seeing if he still had it in him. I thought that was a really effective story he was able to tell with Brock Lesnar and others over the time that he did it. So
yeah, and I think Diamond Dallas Page, his story, because Diamond, he went from kind of mid card nowhere status, just kind of plugging along. Servicing his contract, so to speak. And then we turned him, just about lost me there. We turned him into, my phone is ringing. We turned him into a legitimate superstar within a relatively short period of time. And I like that. Sting, what's really interesting is Sting was a really cool character when I was first hired by WCW. And to be able to take an established character and totally repackage him in every way, shape, or form was a really interesting experiment too. And I was glad to be a part of that. There's been a lot of stuff like that.
And then the last question, I was wondering, what's the most interesting question about your run that someone could ask you but has not? And then if you gave the answer to it too, that would be great. Because I was trying to think, what else could you possibly ask Eric Bischoff about his run in wrestling?
I think how it's affected my life in general. I've been blessed in so many ways, but when I think about those blessings and think about all the things that I've had the opportunity to experience and to share with my family, the overall impact, I think, from the outside looking in, people think, oh, it's the entertainment business, it's the wrestling business, which is even tougher in some respects. Usually, families don't usually survive, relationships don't survive, or at least it's very difficult. Wrestling brought my family closer together. My wife and my kids traveled with me around the world on wrestling business. I was able to expose my children to things and experiences that most kids never get to experience, which has helped round them out as adults and human beings. So wrestling is not only from a financial perspective, obviously, but I just think from an opportunity perspective and a chance to grow and share, my family has really benefited from my time in professional wrestling. And I'm very proud of that because it could easily go the other way.
Very good. Well, MLW One Shot this Thursday, Melrose Ballroom, Long Island City, Queens, and live on YouTube. Eric Bischoff, thank you so much again for joining me today on Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. I look forward to seeing you in New York City.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and hopefully we'll see you there Thursday night.